For 4 decades, the name of Arthur Sterling was synonymous with an unyielding grip on power, an empire forged from icy ambition and a past conveniently swept under the rug. He presided over sprawling metropolises, yet resided in a gilded solitude, a king devoid of emotional connection. That was until an unforeseen call unearthed a buried truth. His mother, the woman he had abandoned in his relentless pursuit of wealth, was nearing her final moments. In a strained reunion, a single utterance from her, brimming with forgiveness and unconditional love, shattered the defenses he had meticulously constructed over a lifetime, exposing the fragile human beneath. This narrative chronicles the journey of a man who had to lose everything to rediscover himself through the most ancient voice of his very being. Arthur's executive suite, perched atop the Sterling Tower, was a sanctuary of polished marble and expansive glass. From that elevation, the city of New York stretched out, a glittering tapestry of lights utterly indifferent to his dominion. Before him lay a multi-billion-dollar contract, awaiting his signature. Just another conquest for his impressive collection. It was then that the intercom emitted a subtle chime. "Mr. Sterling." A call came in from a rural hospital. "It's about your mother." His assistant's voice was hushed, almost a whisper. Arthur froze. His mother, a specter from a past he had sworn never to confront again. He pressed the button. "Patch them through and clear my schedule for the rest of the day." In that moment, Arthur Sterling's empire began to crumble, not from financial collapse, but from a faint echo of a life cast aside. Arthur Sterling, at 60, embodied success built upon an emotional void. His bespoke suits and the opulent timepiece adorning his wrist served as formidable shields against the world, and more crucially, against himself. He moved through the hushed corridors of hospitals bearing his name, charitable foundations carrying his name, and financial behemoths emblazoned with his name, yet none of these titles managed to fill the cavernous emptiness of his sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Solitude was his unwavering companion, cleverly disguised by a packed calendar and lavish galas, where conversations proved as hollow as the forced smiles. He distinctly recalled the last time he had seen his mother, Eleanor, over 40 years ago. A heated exchange in the cramped kitchen of their humble countryside home, a clash of wills between her simple existence and his own insatiable craving for more. He had left her with a hollow promise of return and had never once glanced back. The memory was an old, festering wound he stubbornly kept sealed, numbed by the intoxicating rush of power. Now, with the phone pressed to his ear, the trembling voice of a nurse on the other end, Eleanor was in her final days. A deafening silence descended upon the office, shattering the illusion of absolute control he had so painstakingly crafted. The urgency in the nurse's tone wasn't about complex medical reports or organ failure. It was about time. Time he hadn't spent with her, and which was now rapidly slipping away. He found himself staring at his own aged hand, acutely aware of life's inherent fragility, including his own. The news of his mother's imminent passing, a presence he had systematically erased from his existence, did not elicit the expected indifference. Instead, a sharp pang of something he barely recognized: remorse. It was then that everything began to unravel. Deep down, Arthur yearned for a peace that money simply couldn't procure. He craved authentic connection, the uninhibited laughter he observed in ordinary families during his infrequent morning strolls in the park, far from the intrusive glare of public scrutiny. Secretly, he longed for the approval of his mother, whom he had attempted to appease with a monthly remittance he knew was utterly inadequate to erase his prolonged absence. But he remained ensnared within the golden cage he himself had meticulously constructed, convinced that reigning as the healthcare king or the real estate mogul was the sole means of validating his worth. His initial major downfall wasn't financial, but deeply personal. Several years prior, his only son Ethan had deliberately distanced himself. Ethan, a visionary artist, had grown weary of the relentless pressure to follow in his father's footsteps. and the pervasive absence of genuine affection. The breaking point arrived when Arthur, instead of attending his son's debut solo exhibition, cancelled to close a deal he deemed more important. The gallery buzzed with attendees, yet the space beside Ethan remained conspicuously empty, echoing his father's profound absence. The veiled disappointment in Ethan's gaze struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. It was the very same disappointment he had once inflicted upon his own mother. He attempted to mend the rift with exorbitant gifts and a flimsy excuse, but the chasm had already solidified. Ethan relocated to another continent, carving out his own life, far from his father's immense shadow. Arthur rationalized the heartache as merely a phase his son was enduring, a youthful whim. Yet in the quiet of night, within the vast emptiness of his mansion, he found himself poring over old photographs of Ethan as a child, a pristine smile he could barely recall. With each new report of his empire's escalating success, the sensation of hollowness intensified. He accumulated triumphs that no one celebrated alongside him, trophies from a war that had left him more impoverished than enriched. His worldview, predicated on the notion that material success would inherently lead to happiness and respect, began to unravel. Money, once his most potent instrument of power, now seemed utterly worthless in the face of the void within his soul and the vast distance from his son. And he still believed he could fix everything. The news about his mother dragged him into an abyss that no multi-billion-dollar acquisition could ever hope to fill. Aboard the private jet ferrying him to the quaint rural town, Arthur Sterling, the ruthless magnate, felt like a bewildered little boy. Each beat of his heart resonated with the echo of 40 years of silence, of his refusal to acknowledge the few letters, of gifts sent through an intermediary to avoid any direct contact. He watched the pastoral landscape unfurl beneath him, a stark contrast to the towering skyscrapers he commanded, and the disparity was stifling. The cabin's profound solitude seemed to amplify the pain he had always kept rigorously suppressed. Arriving at the local hospital, a modest, aged building, Arthur was met with the antiseptic scent of rubbing alcohol and a palpable sense of despair, a stark departure from his own opulent medical facilities. His mother, Eleanor, lay in a simple room, connected to rudimentary equipment. Her face, once vibrant and full of life, was now pale and etched with the relentless passage of time and illness. Her white hair fanned out across the pillow. There, confronted by her profound fragility, all his power and influence seemed laughably irrelevant. He approached tentatively, then touched her hand. It was cold and fragile. Gone was the vigor that once prevented him from dreaming small, the voice that called him back to reality. Only a heavy silence permeated the room, punctuated solely by the slow, rhythmic beeping of the monitors. A nurse approached, her gaze imbued with pity and something Arthur interpreted as thinly veiled disdain. "She's been talking about you. Always hoped you'd come back," she said, in a gentle yet firm voice, utterly unconcerned with the man's formidable reputation. The nurse's simple words struck Arthur like a visceral punch to the gut. Hoped he'd come back. For 40 years, she had hoped. The scene transported him back to his childhood kitchen, to the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and warm biscuits, and to Eleanor's voice softly singing as he prepared for school. He saw himself, a boy, brimming with ambitious dreams, but also with an innocence that adulthood and success had inexorably eroded. He spent the ensuing hours in an uncomfortable chair beside her bed, simply observing her. There was nothing to say, no forgiveness to be articulated in mere words, not after such an immense span of time. Silence was the only remaining language. He registered the minutiae, the expression lines around her eyes, the faint tremor in her hand, the almost imperceptible scars from a lifetime of strenuous labor. Each detail represented a story untold to him, a segment of her life he had deliberately chosen to disregard. Guilt overwhelmed him. He who commanded vast fortunes couldn't purchase even one more minute for his mother. He, who had constructed healthcare empires, was utterly powerless before the illness consuming her. The nurse brought him a cup of tea and some crackers, a kind attempt to break the oppressive silence. Arthur, accustomed to lavish banquets and rare vintage wines, felt a knot tighten in his throat as he accepted. This simple, selfless kindness, extended by a stranger, stood in stark contrast to the glacial coldness of his own existence. He thought of Ethan, his estranged son, and the ache of his absence became unbearable. If his mother passed without his forgiveness, and his son remained distant, what would be left of Arthur Sterling? The empty mansion, the name etched onto towering buildings? Everything felt hollow. That night, he thought no one else would return. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of regret pressing down on your chest, a pain so profound it seemed unending? Have you found yourself at rock bottom, yearning for a second chance to rectify something that appeared beyond repair? Respond with a yes in the comments if you've experienced something similar and understand what it means to need a turning point. Arthur felt Eleanor's cool hand in his, a subtle movement in her fingers, an almost imperceptible flicker of consciousness. He leaned closer, his heart pounding. She opened her eyes, a faint thread of the bluish light that once gleamed with such vitality. It took time for her gaze to focus, but when it did, her lips parted. A hoarse, barely audible whisper. Son, that word. A single syllable laden with forgiveness, with unconditional love, with a lifetime of patient waiting. There was no reproach, no lingering pain, only the pure acceptance of a mother. And in that moment, Arthur Sterling, the unyielding magnate, completely broke down. Hot tears streamed down his face, washing away decades of armor, of ego, of gnawing regret. He sobbed, not as the ruthless businessman, but as the boy who had once departed, lost, and now miraculously found. He remained there for hours, holding her hand, feeling her faint pulse, her subtle breath. The billions, the properties, the empire, none of it mattered anymore. The only tangible reality was the profound connection with this fragile woman who, with a single word, had reopened his heart. At some point, she squeezed his hand back, a minuscule gesture, yet worth more than all the contracts he had ever signed. He began to speak, whispering close to her ear. He spoke of Ethan, of the chasm between them, of the hollowness that money had left behind. He didn't know if she heard him, but the urgent need to confess, to unburden his soul, was overwhelming. A sudden memory surfaced. One day, when he was a child suffering from a high fever, Eleanor had spent the entire night sitting beside his bed, softly singing until he finally drifted off to sleep. He could almost feel the cool dampness of the washcloth on his forehead. It was the same unwavering dedication, the same unconditional love he now witnessed 40 years later. The genesis of his transformation wasn't magical, but the rediscovery of a love that had always been there, patiently waiting for him. He didn't know if it would succeed, but for the first time, he wanted to try. With Eleanor's passing, the absence Arthur felt transformed into an abyssal void. Yet paradoxically, it also became a powerful catalyst. In the days following the modest funeral in the countryside, he did not immediately return to New York. Instead, he lingered in his mother's small house, a place he had disavowed for decades. Every object, every dust-covered photograph was a silent testament to a simple life rich in affection, from which he had voluntarily exiled himself. He spent hours sifting through old boxes, discovering letters she had written to him, carefully preserved but never sent, brimming with concern and a tenacious love. He read each one, feeling the crushing weight of words he had never allowed to reach him. This immersion in Eleanor's past marked the crucial first step in his personal rebuilding. He began to perceive the world not solely through the lens of profit and power, but also through the perspective of someone who had lived with little, yet with dignity and profound affection. He realized that his mother, even in her simplicity, had forged emotional bridges that he, with all his immense wealth, had ruthlessly destroyed. Regret was a burdensome weight, but also a formidable teacher. Arthur began to enact subtle changes. He cancelled superfluous meetings, delegated tasks he previously insisted on micromanaging. He started eating healthier, sleeping more soundly. And for the first time in years, he called Ethan. His son's voice on the other end of the line was distant, cold. There was no euphoria in the verbal reunion, only a painful formality. Arthur attempted to explain, to apologize for his absence, for his relentless obsession. Ethan listened, but his responses were curt, laden with years of lingering resentment. Arthur knew it wouldn't be easy, that rebuilding his relationship with Ethan would be a journey as arduous as reconciling with the memory of his mother. He needed to battle his own impatience and the expectation of immediate forgiveness. Days after their initial conversation, Ethan finally called back. Not a formal call, but an invitation for dinner the following evening. A small, unpretentious Japanese restaurant in a neighborhood Arthur barely remembered existing. Arthur felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, a blend of apprehension and a flicker of genuine joy. It was the culmination of his internal reconstruction, the moment to put everything he had learned into practice. He didn't wear one of his expensive suits, opting instead for a more casual shirt, something Eleanor would have approved of. He arrived early, an unprecedented act for him, who always made others wait. When Ethan arrived, his smile was cautious, but there was a sparkle in his eyes that Arthur hadn't seen in years. The forced formality of their previous encounters was absent. Ethan began to speak about his new exhibition, about the struggle to find inspiration, but also about the profound passion that drove him. Arthur listened, truly listened, without interruption, without judgment, without attempting to offer business advice. He simply listened. And then he spoke, not about the empire, not about money. He spoke about Eleanor. He recounted to Ethan the final days at the hospital, about the simple word that had utterly broken him, about the gnawing regret and the silent promise he had made to his mother. He spoke about the emptiness he had carried, about the fear of repeating his past mistakes with Eleanor, with Ethan. Ethan's eyes welled up. It was the first time he had witnessed his father so vulnerable, so profoundly human. He wasn't the distant magnate, but a man remorseful and transformed. Arthur extended his hand across the table and touched Ethan's, a simple gesture yet laden with profound meaning. "I'm so sorry, my son, for everything. I wasted so much time, but I want you to know that I've learned. I want to make amends, not out of obligation, but because I love you. And your mother, she taught me what true love truly is." The silence that followed wasn't awkwardness, but profound emotion. Ethan squeezed his father's hand, and for the first time Arthur felt the bridge being constructed between them, not with bricks of money, but with threads of honesty and deep affection. That dinner, with its simple sushi and warm, ambient lighting, served as the stage for Arthur's greatest victory. Not a triumph in a boardroom, but the reclamation of his son's heart, a love he believed he had lost forever. The mirrored visual imagery was clear. If at the beginning the phone rang in a cold, depersonalized office, signaling distance and conflict, now it rang for a sincere invitation in the warmth of a reunion, symbolizing genuine acceptance. If it began with the 40 years of silent abandonment, it concluded with words that changed everything, filling the void with love and reconciliation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was deeply, profoundly satisfying. Months later, the Sterling Tower still stood, imposing on the New York skyline, but something fundamental had shifted within its founder. Arthur Sterling, though still a formidable businessman, now operated with a newfound perspective. His dinners now regularly included Ethan, and their conversations extended far beyond financial reports. They visited art galleries, debated painting techniques, and Arthur even ventured to sketch clumsy drawings in his notepad. Ethan, in turn, began frequenting the mansion in Greenwich, no longer as a stranger, but as a son returning home. On Sundays, they established a ritual, walking through the park, far from inquisitive glances, discussing everything and nothing, as a father and son should have done their entire lives. The most symbolic scene, however, occurred once a month. Arthur drove his own car, not the luxurious one, but a more unassuming model, to the small rural town. He visited Eleanor's grave, not with the crushing guilt of before, but with a serene, contained peace. He brought fresh flowers, watered the surrounding plants, and sat in quiet contemplation, recounting to her the latest news about Ethan, about the small joys he finally allowed himself to experience. On one occasion, Ethan accompanied him. It was a moment of shared silence, where generations converged in the presence of the woman who united them. There were no grand pronouncements, just the murmur of the wind through the trees and the mutual understanding that, although Eleanor was not physically present, her legacy of love and forgiveness permeated their new lives. Arthur no longer felt the incessant need to prove anything to anyone. The emptiness that had tormented him had been filled, not by more money or power, but by the profound reconnection with his roots, with his son, and with the most authentic part of himself that had been suffocated by decades of blind ambition. His mother's house in the countryside, once a place of shame, now stood as a sanctuary of cherished memories and a constant reminder of his profound redemption. He had found his peace not in marble castles, but in the profound simplicity of affection and the liberating strength of forgiveness. She didn't conquer the world, but she conquered what was within her. Arthur Sterling's ultimate transformation didn't manifest in a burst of glorious triumph, but in a deep, abiding quietude. He assimilated the most essential lesson, that true legacy is not built with marble and steel, but with enduring bonds of love and forgiveness. The pain of Eleanor's loss, combined with the simple word she bestowed upon him, unveiled the undeniable truth that life is not measured by what one accumulates, but by what one reconnects with. He grasped that for his entire life he had sought validation in the external world, when true peace and fulfillment resided in the acceptance of who he was, including his imperfections, and in the profound capacity to give and receive affection. Love, he realized, was not a weakness, but the most potent force for genuine reconstruction. And this lesson is not exclusive to powerful magnates. How many of us in our own lives don't lose ourselves in pursuit of what we believe to be happiness, a certain status, a material possession, external validation, only to neglect what truly matters? The invisible bridges of affection, family, and friendship, which seem so simple, are in fact the most resilient. They sustain us when everything else crumbles. Arthur's story reminds us that it is never too late to seek forgiveness, to mend what has been broken, or to cherish the love that often is right there, silent, merely waiting for us to turn our gaze towards it. True wealth, after all, isn't found in a bank balance, but in an open heart. If this story resonated with you in any way, your like lets us know we're on the right track. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. Seriously, I read every single one, and I make sure to respond with care to those who take a moment to comment. And if you believe in the power of stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. This channel is just beginning, and every new subscription is what gives me the drive and certainty to continue this journey. I'm really counting on your support. Don't leave yet. Choose one of the 2 stories I've left on the screen for you to watch next. I'll see you in the next video.